Hello, everybody. I think I got this working. This is the first episode of the Benchwarmers podcast, hosted by me, Bandwagon Sports, or Stephen Hayward is my real name, but whatever. Who cares about that? Today, in episode 1 of this podcast, I want to talk about the trade deadline. It just happened 2 days ago. Well, for you guys, 2 days ago. It's Tuesday night for me. Currently 1:01 a.m. I record my videos late, and there's a lot of stuff that went on in the trade deadline, so I'm going to take my time with it and go over it. I already made a trade deadline review for the Tampa Bay Lightning, so if you haven't watched that, I recommend you go watch that video, just for a little bit more in depth for team trades. But yeah, I got my handy dandy notebook, as you can hear, and we're going to get right into this. But before that, I also want to talk about, there's been some signings and stuff and some news and waiver claims and all that around the NHL that I want to talk about as well. And also, a pretty brief draft review, like my top 10 rankings and some guys who I think could be some pretty good steals in the draft. But yeah, let's just start with the trade deadline stuff. And starting with we're only going back 3 days, so April 10th is when I'm starting this trade deadline review. So let's get into it. So the first move that was made on April 10th was Devan Dubnyk going to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for a 5th in 2022 and Greg Pateryn. Now, so far in 17 games played for San Jose, Dubnyk had 3 wins, 9 losses, and 2 overtime losses. Horrible record. He had an .898 save percentage and a .318 goals against average. He's playing like Curtis McElhinney on a bad team, so you know what? I'd rather Dubnyk than McElhinney. He's 34 years old, and Dubnyk's honestly a guy who I don't see sticking around for much longer in the NHL. I think that his time is pretty short-coming. He should retire maybe after this season. If not, then probably the next season, but he's just kind of out of gas, it seems. And San Jose acquires a 5th in 2022 and Greg Pateryn, as I said. So far in the AHL, Greg Pateryn has 10 games played at 3 goals for 3 points. He's a -5 with 10 penalty minutes, and he plays for the Eagles in the AHL, which is the Avalanche's affiliate. And he is 30 years old, so you get a depth defenseman and a mid-round pick in 2022 for a backup caliber. I don't even know if I would call him backup caliber, for just maybe a AHL starter who's up there in age, and I would say that's a pretty good return for Devan Dubnyk, especially with his contract. I would probably flip him for that price any day of the week because he's just not playing well at all, and I wouldn't want him on my team. Let's move on to move number 2. Florida Panthers acquire Brandon Montour from the Buffalo Sabres for a 3rd-round pick in 2021. And Montour is a good young defenseman. I think he can definitely turn his career around again. He kind of went south in Buffalo, but in Florida they have a good system there. I think he can really turn it around there. He's only 27, but in 38 games played, he has 5 goals, 9 assists for 14 points. He's a -13 and has 24 penalty minutes. But it's just a rough go for everyone in Buffalo, and I'm really glad that they traded away a lot of those guys in Buffalo for picks and stuff, because none of those guys want to be there. The whole team's playing without any motivation, and they might as well get what they can for the guys that they can trade away. That's how I look at things. Moving on to the third trade, and this is the biggest one of April the 10th, and it involves my Tampa Bay Lightning. But yeah, so it's a 3-team deal, so I'm going to start with Detroit and Tampa. So Detroit acquires a 4th in 2021, mid-round pick in a weak draft. What can I say? And in return, they acquire Tampa Bay acquires Brian Lashoff, who in 13 games played in the AHL for Grand Rapids has 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points. He's a +5 and 6 penalty minutes, and he is 30 years old. So just a, depth defenseman, a guy who can play top 4 minutes in the AHL. Nothing special at all for Tampa. They got like 15 guys ahead of him who will come into the lineup. But, defensive depth is never bad. And now we get into the move with Tampa and Columbus. Now, the reason why Detroit had to be brought into this deal was because Tampa cannot afford David Savard. I think Detroit took on $3 million of Savard's cap because Tampa's only paying him $1 million, which is awesome. I'll take that. But, yeah, Columbus acquires a first in 2021 and a third in 2022 for David Savard. And Tampa loading up on 2 defensemen in this deal, 1 depth defenseman and 1 NHL caliber defenseman who is now our best right-handed shot defenseman in the lineup, is honestly a pretty big win for me. I really don't hate this trade. I just hate trading away the first round pick, even if it is 2021. But there's nothing I can do about it. So let's get into the stats. In 40 games played, Savard has 1 goal, 5 assists for 6 points. He's a minus 19, which is totally awful. That's even worse than Brandon Montour. And Savard might be the guy who's playing the most minutes over there in Columbus, but they're not nearly as bad as Buffalo. And Savard is also having the worst season in his career analytics-wise. He's just not really good. There's some aspects of his game that he's improved on, but not enough where I say I'm comfortable giving up a first-round pick for him. And I don't know, come playoff time, I'll probably thank Julien Brisebois for this deal, but right now in the regular season, until he improves those defensive metrics, when I look in probably 10 games or so, and I look at those numbers, and if they've improved a considerable amount, then I'll say, okay, this is a good deal. But for now, I'm on the fringe of this trade. I don't really know how to think of it, and it'll remain that way for a while. But let's move on to the last trade of April 10th, and it involves New Jersey and Washington. Washington acquires a conditional third in 2021. I do not know what the condition is. But they will probably just get the third or a fourth or something. And in return, the New Jersey Devils acquire Jonas Sagenthaler, young defenseman from the Capitals. In 7 games so far for the Caps, Sagenthaler has no points. He's a -3 with 2 penalty minutes. He's only 23. He was drafted in the second round of 2015, and this is a guy who could kind of be another Mirko Mueller for the Devils, a shutdown defenseman who plays bottom pairing minutes. Penalty kill, just another decent guy to have in the lineup. You could put him in and out of the lineup as a 7th defenseman. Good acquisition for the Devils. I have no complaints with this one at all. So now let's move on to April 11th, and there's, one more trade on April 11th. Yeah, we got 5 trades on the 11th. So let's hop into it. The first trade, Montreal acquires John Merrill I actually don't have John Merrill's stats, so I'm sorry about that, but they get John Merrill, who, is a decent 6th or 7th defenseman. I think Montreal will probably have him in the lineup as a 6th, especially considering they dropped Victor Mete to waivers, which we'll get into in, probably about 20 or 30 minutes. But yeah, so they acquire John Merrill, loading up for that playoff run. They're probably going to be in the playoffs. In exchange for Hayden Verbeek, who is a young 23-year-old defenseman who I believe they got in the second round of 2015, second or fourth. I can't really remember right now. It might not even be any of those, but so far in the AHL, Verbeek has 7 games played, 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points. He is a +4 with 0 penalty minutes, and, decent AHL defenseman, just a guy who's going to be there, might turn out to be a okay depth defenseman one day, but you never know. And also Detroit acquires a 5th round pick in 2021, so a decent haul for a guy who is a top 6 caliber defenseman. If Verbeek turns out to be even a okay defenseman in the future, and that 5th round pick turns out to be an okay player in the future, this is worth it for Detroit, for sure. So moving on to the next one, which is the biggest deal of the day. It is another 3-team deal, and we're going to get on with the, 3rd team deal. San Jose acquires a 4th in 2021 in exchange for Stefan Noesen going to Toronto. And Noesen, so far in 12 games, has 2 goals, 4 assists for 6 points. He's a -2 and, has 23 penalty minutes for San Jose in the AHL. So, half a point per game player in the AHL. He is a guy who has NHL experience. He's 28 years old. He's not really going to grow at all, but he's going to be a decent depth forward for you. And Toronto has a lot of those, so he's probably pretty buried in the lineup. But just a guy who, again, if injuries strike, you're happy you have him. He can add some grit to the fourth line. Nosen's that kind of player, and I think this is a good move for both teams. You get what you want on either end. And now we get to the big puppy of this trade, where Columbus acquires another first in 2021 and a fourth in 2022 in exchange for their captain, Nick Foligno. Nick Foligno, which, long-serving captain of the Blue Jackets. He had an all-star caliber campaign in 2014-15. He was an all-star captain. Absolutely amazing season for Foligno, but he is a shell of that player. He's a guy who's going to play third-line minutes for the Maple Leafs. 42 games played, 7 goals, 9 assists, 16 points. He's a -3, which is not horrible at all considering Columbus. He has 28 penalty minutes, and he is 33 years old. So, I think his best year was probably a couple seasons ago, but he's a guy who can play bottom 6 minutes for the next 2 or so years if he sticks around in Toronto. Just a gritty physical guy. You could kind of compare him to a Blake Coleman of last year for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think he brings the same type of caliber as Blake Coleman, a bit older, and I think Coleman has really developed into a great two-way player for the Lightning, not just a pure power forward in the bottom 6, a legitimate scoring threat. He can make plays. And I think Coleman's a lot better than Foligno, but Foligno's kind of similar to Coleman with what the Maple Leafs are going for when acquiring him. So good trade there for the Leafs. Nothing against them there. Let's get into the third deal, and it involves 2 Canadian teams, Toronto, Calgary. Toronto acquires David Rittich from the Calgary Flames, their starting goalie / backup goalie for 2 or 3 years now. And I like Rittich, but in 15 games played, he has 4 wins, 7 losses, and 1 overtime loss with a .904 save percentage and a 2.9 goals against average. And he's 28 years old, so he's past his prime. He's not going to be getting any better. But, with Frederick Anderson on the IR, Rittich is a solid enough backup on a good depth team like Toronto, where if Jack Campbell goes down, you can stick Rittich in there and he'll perform okay. He's able enough to steal a few games. He's no Curtis McElhinney where he flops against Detroit, he flops against Nashville, and don't even get me started on how bad McElhinney is. I'm so upset Tampa didn't trade for a backup at the deadline. Again, you'll find my ranting in the Lightning trade deadline review on this channel. But yeah, in exchange for Rittich, Calgary receives a third in 2022. I don't know who that player is going to be yet, but it's a pretty fair return for a mid-tier level backup goalie in the NHL, I would say. Let's move on now. Trade number 4, Boston acquires Mike Riley from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for a third in 2022. Mike Riley's actually played really well this year. I think that Boston really did steal him from the Senators. I think Mike Riley is at least worth a second-round pick. In 40 games played, he has 19 assists for 19 points. He's only a -2 and has 18 penalty minutes. He's a good offensive two-way kind of player. He's getting the points on the board. He's not horrible defensively at all, and he's a good gritty guy as well. I think Mike Riley's great, and he's only 27 years old. You got a couple years to work with there if you're Boston. I think Mike Riley slots well into that top 4. I think he's a great player for Boston, and I think they really stole him from the Senators. So yeah, moving on to the final trade of the 11th. The New York Islanders acquire Braden Coburn for a 7th-round pick in 2022 from the Ottawa Senators. Coburn, a guy who used to play for Tampa, decent depth defenseman, probably at 8th or 9th on a team like the Islanders. But in 16 games played, he has 2 assists for 2 points, a -3 and 10 penalty minutes for Ottawa. He is 36 years old. This is probably his last year or second last year. But just a guy, come playoff time, again, add some grit if you have injuries. He might be a guy who you want to stick in the bottom pairing just for some extra defensive help. Barry Trotz loves guys like Braden Coburn, and it's a good move for the Islanders. So, yeah, moving on to the 12th. I'm going to take a drink, though, before I get here. Ooh, that's good. That's some good stuff. All right, trade deadline day. And we got a page and a half to go over here. Almost 2 pages. So, let's get into it. First trade of the day. Pittsburgh acquires Jeff Carter for a conditional second and conditional third in 2022. Really solid return for Jeff Carter. I think that's an awesome haul for them. Jeff Carter in 40 games played has 8 goals, 11 assists for 19 points. He's a -6 with 22 penalty minutes, and he's 36 years old. So this is probably his last season of even somewhat quality in the NHL. He's not getting better. He's only getting worse. And, I think Jeff Carter's been kind of overrated for a while now. But this is a really great haul for the LA Kings. I think Jeff Carter is worth maybe a third. But they managed to get 2 early round picks for him, and that's great for LA, great for their future to add on to that already bolstering prospect pool. So now we got the second biggest trade of the day, I would say. Yep. And it involves Boston and Buffalo. So starting with Buffalo side, they acquire Anders Bjork, who in 30 games played has 2 goals, 3 assists for 5 points. He's a -8 with 10 penalty minutes. And he is 24, so he has a little bit more room to grow. He's a bottom 6 forward for Buffalo. I think they kind of got fleeced in this deal big time. They also acquired a second in 2021, which is, I don't know, late third in 2020, late third, early fourth. But there's some quality guys in the second round, as I'll go over later. And in exchange, Boston receives Curtis Lazar, who in 33 games has 5 goals, 4 assists for 9 points. He's a -4 with 0 penalty minutes, and he is only 26 years old, a former first-round pick and 19th overall by the Calgary Flames. And he's not really worked out to that caliber in the NHL, but he's still a solid third-line scoring option for any team in the league. I think Lazar is still a decent player, and I'm happy he's in the NHL at least. But the big piece in this trade is Taylor Hall coming back to Boston with 50% salary retention. This is an awesome pickup for Boston going into the playoffs. This is going to be a guy who's probably going to be playing second-line minutes, who can add first-line scoring if he hits his stride. This is a steal for Taylor Hall. And Kevin Adams, I don't think he knows how to make trades, but Boston does. And in 37 games played, these numbers might not look impressive. 2 goals, 17 assists for 19 points. But on Buffalo, where they struggle to get any goals off the power play, it's pretty decent. He was a -21 with 24 penalty minutes, though, for Buffalo. And he's 28 years old, so he's not old at all either. He's a guy who's in his prime. He's probably still has 5 or 6 good years in him, and I doubt Boston's going to re-sign him. But if you can get Taylor Hall on a good second-line contract, and he turns out to be even a fraction of the player he was in New Jersey when he won that Hart Trophy, then that's a really good second-line player for you. So great trade for Boston. Buffalo is Buffalo. What can I say? Let's move on. So Chicago acquired Adam Gaudette from Vancouver in exchange for Matt Highmore. So Adam Gaudette in 33 games has 4 goals, 3 assists for 7 points, a -13 and 12 penalty minutes. 24-year-old, good player for the Canucks. Hasn't really come into his own yet, struggling this year. And they ship him out for a guy who's even worse. I think they're just trying to spread their COVID to every other team in the NHL at this point. But Matt Highmore for Chicago this year in 24 games played has 2 assists for 2 points. He's a -5 with 6 penalty minutes, and he is a year older at 25. So I don't know. I think like, Highmore's kind of just worse in every aspect. He's not any better defensively, even, if that's what they were going for. And he's even a year older, so you got less time to develop. And who knows, you could see Adam Gaudette come to Chicago, and you could maybe see him turn into a Dylan Strome-type player, where he kind of rebounds his career, and he becomes... Oh, I'm hiccuping now. A decent third-line scoring option for Chicago, and that would be great value if, they just give up Highmore, who's a fringe fourth-line center. Next trade, going to the Vegas Golden Knights, is Matthias Yanmark and a fifth-round pick in 2021. This is from Chicago, so Matthias Yanmark in 41 games played has 10 goals, 9 assists for 19 points. He is a minus 17, which is pretty awful, but you're not acquiring him for his defense. You're acquiring him for his goal scoring. And he's 28 years old, fifth in 2021, as I said. And Chicago kind of fleeced Vegas here. They managed to acquire a second, eighth, and a third in this deal, which is insane. A second in 2021 and a third in 2022. This is like almost as bad as the trade that is coming up soon, but really great deal here for Yanmark. I'm not saying he's not worth a second, but I'm saying that he's going to be a third-line scoring option for Vegas, a guy who shows up here and there, but I don't know if he's worth two early-round picks, but great job on Stan Bowman for getting that trade done. Next, we move on to Tampa Bay's second move of the deadline, and this I'm fine with this one as well, but it's whatever. So, Tampa Bay acquires Frederick Klason, who in 4 games in the NHL has no points. He's a +1, and he is 28 years old. So, another depth defenseman, probably a guy who's 9 or 10 in the lineup for us when it comes to defensemen. I'm okay with him loading up on depth defensemen. Really not what we need, though, which I'll get into in that review video. If you go and watch that, I get right into it. And in exchange, we trade away Magnus Crona, who is a 20-year-old prospect goaltender. So I'm really not happy with this trade, considering we give up a future asset for a guy who's not going to really help out at all. 18 games played for Crona, though. 7 wins, 11 losses, 0 overtime losses, a .907 save percentage, and a 2.47 goals against average for the University of Denver in the NCHC, which is basically NCAA hockey. And I like Crona. He was a 5th-round pick back in 2018 for the Lightning. I really don't see a need to trade him, especially when you're not going to acquire a backup goalie by freeing up that goalie slot. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Unless Tampa's looking at going after a guy in this draft, conspiracy theory, Tampa trades Magnus Crona to acquire Sebastian Kosa in this upcoming draft with their second. Who knows? It could happen. I wouldn't be totally opposed to that at all. I really like Sebastian Kosa. I think he could even be grabbed in the late first round with how he's playing right now. I'd even be okay with one of the 3 Russian goalies. Just have to wait and see, though. Moving on to the next trade, New Jersey and Edmonton. New Jersey acquires a conditional 4th in 2022, a 3rd if Oilers make the second round of the playoffs, which is pretty likely, and this is a pretty good haul, a 3rd in 2022 if, a 3rd in 2022 for Dimitri Kulikov, headed off to Edmonton. So Edmonton, overpaying a little bit, just the slightest amount for a good 6th or 7th defenseman in the lineup. Come playoff time, they'll probably be happy they acquired him. He had some good defense to the bottom pairing. In 38 games played, Kulikov has 2 assists for 2 points, -4, and 26 penalty minutes. And he's 30 years old. He was a former first-round pick of the Florida Panthers, and he began his career pretty bright, but couldn't really translate those early years into a real career. And he's been bouncing back and forth between, a scratched guy as 6th defenseman in the NHL or an AHL starter. It's just a bumpy road for Kulikov, but overall, no complaints here. Next trade, Colorado and Chicago, and Colorado reacquires Kyle Soderberg, so they actually lost him in they traded him to Arizona at free agency for Kyle Capobianco, and Soderberg didn't really work out in Arizona. He was coming off of a career year, and I knew he wasn't going to replicate it, but still wasn't great at all. And in 34 games this year, he has 7 goals, 8 assists for 15 points. He's a -5 with 14 penalty minutes, and he is 35, and he is still a decent bottom 6 kind of defensive forward more than anything, but he still has that offensive touch slightly. In return, the Chicago Blackhawks received Josh Dickinson, who in 8 games in the ECHL for Utah has 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points, -5, 2 penalty minutes, and he is 23 years old. So a guy who might be able to come a middle 6 AHL forward one day, maybe a depth forward, who knows. I really don't think that Dickinson is going to become much. And they also received Ryder Rolston, who was a 5th-round pick in 2019, so a young player who could actually become something for them. 28 games played this year, 1 goal, 5 assists for 6 points, +4 and 31 penalty minutes in Notre Dame for Notre Dame in the Big Ten. And like I said, he is 19, a guy who could become anything for them, honestly. I'm not going to put a prediction on where he slots in the lineup because he's too young for that. We don't really know what's going to happen with Rolston. But yeah, overall, decent trade for both teams. I think Chicago's looking for more of the upside here than the risk, and they pulled the trigger on it. So this is the trade I was talking about at the Yanmark trade where overpayment has happened here. And I'm just adjusting myself real quick. Okay, get ready for this. Florida acquires Sam Bennett from the Calgary Flames. Sam Bennett, who was drafted 4th overall in 2014, decent 4th liner, 3rd liner, fringe 3rd liner in the NHL. 38 games played this year, has 4 goals and 12 points. -14, 19 penalty minutes. He's 24, so still has some time to grow. If Florida successfully develops into a top 6 forward, which I'd be surprised at, then that's great. But what they give up is a 2022 second, which is kind of like a 2021 first. There's some really great players in that second round of 2022. And Emile Henneman, who is a second in 2020, number 43. And Henneman, so far in 43 games in the SHL, has 7 goals, 6 assists for 13 points, +4, 14 penalty minutes. He's only 19. They're giving up 2 second-round picks and quality drafts for Sam Bennett. And this is huge overpayment, but I guess he's a guy who had some grit to that bottom 6 in Florida come playoff time. I sound like a broken record. They're gonna thank the GM for making this trade. Just so much of those moves where you trade away future assets and you kind of overpay a little bit, or you don't like a trade, and come playoff time you're probably going to thank them for that trade. It's just what happens in the NHL. But just not a great trade. I'm going to move on before I get too into it. Now this one is between Montreal and Philadelphia. Montreal acquires Erik Gustafsson, who in 24 games played has 1 goal, 10 points, a -2, and 0 penalty minutes. For Philadelphia, he is 29 years old. He had 1 good year for Chicago and then dipped. And in return, Philadelphia receives the 7th in 2022. Nothing special to talk about here. Let's move on. Next trade between Toronto and Anaheim. And this is Toronto's last move of the deadline. Toronto acquires Ben Hutton from Anaheim. 34 games played, 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points, a -13 and 11 penalty minutes. And he is 27 years old, so he's a guy who could potentially, develop a little bit more, but I highly doubt it. Ben Hutton's best years are behind him in Vancouver. And in return, Anaheim receives a 5th in 2022. So not a bad haul there for Anaheim at all. Oh, and my book was stuck. For a guy who kind of just was decent, bottom pairing guy for them. Okay, now we are on the second page, finally. So this next trade between Nashville and Ottawa. Nashville acquires Erik Goodbranson, who in 26 games played has 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points, a -13 with 47 penalty minutes, and he is 29 years old. So nothing special at all with Goodbranson. We all know who he is. He's just a gritty 6th, 7th defenseman who really likes to get in people's business, but I have nothing against the guy. And in return, Ottawa receives a 2023 7th-round pick, so really looking into the future there with that. But again, who knows, that 7th-round pick could turn out to be better than Goodbranson, who was drafted 3rd overall. And I'm going to take another drink right here quick. Ooh, that is better. All right. Next trade. Oh, I lied. This is Toronto's last trade of the deadline. So this one between San Jose and Toronto again. San Jose acquires Alex Barabanov, who is a KHL signing. And so far in 13 games played, Barabanov has 1 assist for 1 point, a +1 and 4 penalty minutes for Toronto. Probably a guy who doesn't really become anything more than a 4th-line player for San Jose, but you never know. And in return, Toronto receives Antti Suomela. In 10 games played, has 1 goal, 5 assists for 6 points, +1 and 2 penalty minutes, and the AHL. So a good top 6 AHL forward, 27 years old, for a guy who's probably about the same caliber, except you're playing him in the NHL. So not a bad trade there, pretty even, if you ask me. Let's move on to the next. And, oh, sorry about that, guys. I accidentally tapped my screen with the arm. And I know this is a really bad-looking image, but it should look better in the thumbnail. I just have to use something to back up the podcast. So I'm using this. Next move between Anaheim, Carolina, and I think this is a pretty big one. Anaheim acquires Hayden Fleury, who, yes, Hayden Fleury, longtime Carolina Hurricanes prospect, hasn't really worked out. 35 games played this year, 1 goal, 1 point, -6 and 6 penalty minutes. He's 24. Anaheim might be able to do something with him, maybe turn him into a more third pairing, shutdown role kind of defenseman. Wouldn't be the worst option in the world. In exchange, Carolina receives Yanni Hakanpää, who in 42 games this year has 1 assist for 1 point, even plus-minus, and 31 penalty minutes. So kind of gritty Eric Goodbranson type player. Came over from Finland, had some potential. Hasn't really done much. He's 29 years old. And they also receive a 6th in 2021. So not really too notable of a trade here, but Hayden Fleury is interesting. We'll see if Anaheim can do something with him. Obviously, they have faith in him. Next trade between Washington and Philadelphia. And Washington acquires Michael Raffl from Philadelphia, who in 34 games played has 3 goals, 5 assists for 8 points, a -5 and 26 penalty minutes. He is 32 years old. He's been a decent, middle 6 kind of guy for Philadelphia throughout his whole career. He's never left Philly until this point, and at this point, he's probably just a 4th-line scoring role player. And in return, Philadelphia receives a 5th in 2021. Nothing special. Moving on, Winnipeg and Vancouver. Winnipeg acquires Jordy Ben, who in 31 games played has 1 goal, 8 assists for 9 points. He's a +5 and 9 penalty minutes, and he's 33 years old. And in return, Vancouver gets a 6th in 2021. And personally, I think that Jordy Ben is probably worth a 3rd or a 4th. He's playing okay offensively. He's playing a good defensive role with that +5, and he has decent defensive metrics. Jordy Ben, I think Winnipeg got for a pretty good deal. He's a guy who could be a 5th defenseman for them pretty easily, maybe even slot into that top 4. But yeah, Vancouver, again, spreading all their COVID around even more by getting rid of Jordy Ben. They're trying to infect the NHL this year. And another Vancouver trade here, Vancouver and Chicago. Vancouver acquires Madison Bowey from Chicago, and I remember when Chicago signed Madison Bowey, I was pretty excited. I thought he was going to be a really great player who could slot into that top 4 for them and, kind of grow out what he did in Detroit, but not been the case at all. 2 games played, no points, +1, 25 years old, pretty good player. Vancouver also receives a 5th in 2021 in this deal, and in exchange, Vancouver spreads a COVID pick with a fourth in 2021, so they're spreading COVID through their draft pick as well. Those naughty guys over there in Vancouver just spreading the COVID. Cannot believe it. And we're finally on to our last trade of the year. And this one came nearly an hour after the deadline. And it was the biggest trade of the deadline, so I'm glad I waited. I'm glad I kept refreshing my TSN feed. I was really hoping for Tampa, for a message to pop up where it says Bernier to Tampa, but that never happened. But oh well. So in this trade, Washington acquires Anthony Mantha. That's right, Anthony Mantha. 42 games played, 11 goals, 10 assists for 21 points, minus 14 with 17 penalty minutes, and he is 26 years old. Mantha is a great fit in Washington, a second-line power forward who has a bit of a scoring touch to him. I think he will be really great with Kuznetsov on that second line, TJ Oshie as well. And Washington, great fit. In exchange, Detroit receives Richard Panik, who in 36 games played has 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points, a minus 9, and 16 penalty minutes. 30 years old, started his career with Tampa. He was a second-round pick. He's been a decent bottom 6 player his whole career. Nothing changed here. And they also receive Jacob Vrana, who is... I'll get into this for a minute. Let's just go over his stats first. 39 games played, 11 goals, 14 assists for 25 points, a plus 9 with 8 penalty minutes, and he is a year younger than Mantha at 25. And I like Vrana a lot more. He's only being played 12 minutes a night, and he's putting up, really great numbers on that third line, in that third line role. And honestly, I think that this is a steal of a trade for Detroit, already getting a guy who can be a point-per-game player on that first line with a guy like Dylan Larkin when given that opportunity. And Richard Panik can be a good third liner for Detroit, no problem. Kind of bolsters them up a little bit more than they were with Mantha. But get this, Yzerman did even more than that. He also acquired a second in 2022, which is going to be great, and a first in 2021. So all this huge package for Anthony Mantha, which, Mantha, I think, is not going to get any better than he is. I know Red Wings fans were hoping he would really break out, but I think his role is just a pretty good top 6 power forward with a bit of a scoring touch to him. Nothing more than that. Vrana, on the other hand, I think has a real chance at becoming an NHL All-Star after this trade. Washington, I'm going to say right now, Washington's going to really regret getting rid of him and not playing him where he belongs to be played. But that is the trade deadline. Lots of moves, as you can tell. But now we got even more moves, but not trades this time. Now we got signings and records and just overall kind of news going around the NHL. So let's get into it. First off, Nikita Gusev signs with the Panthers. New Jersey released Nikita Gusev, terminated his contract, which was like $4 million or something. Has just not really played well this year. He had a great first season in the NHL. He had like 45 points in 65 games. Really, really great player. Hasn't replicated it at all. I believe Gusev can turn it around in Florida. He signed a 1-year, $1 million deal. He'll probably be played on that third line in a scoring role. But, I really hope that Gusev can turn it around. And if he doesn't, he's probably headed back for the KHL. Next, we got the Jack Campbell win streak. So Jack Campbell set the NHL record with 11 wins to start the season. That streak was snapped against the Canadiens last night, 4-2. Well, 2 nights ago for you guys, but last night for me, 4-2. They lost, but you know what? Still a great streak for Campbell, and congratulations on that, buddy. I always knew Jack Campbell was gonna I just always had it in the back of my mind that Dallas gave up on Jack Campbell too early. He got to LA. I saw the way he played, and I said, you know what, this guy's going to reach his potential, and he has, lo and behold. So I was right about one thing. Now, just great career for Campbell so far, even if it's going to be a bit shorter. The KHL playoffs are actually going on, if you guys haven't noticed. They're in the semifinals right now with CSKA playing SKA and Avangard playing AK Bars. CSKA has beaten SKA, which are both St. Petersburg teams. CSKA won 4-2, and they're probably my favorite to win the cup right now, the Garrigan Cup or whatever you call it. And Avangard and AK Bars are actually tied 3-3 right now. Avangard had a 3-2 lead, but AK Bars tied it up. I'm going to put my money on Avangard. I think they will shut it down in Game 7 and go up against CSKA in the finals. Next thing, we got Sami Vatanen was claimed by the Dallas Stars. Another guy from New Jersey, just a defenseman. Decent offensive role, hasn't been horrible defensively, but a guy who they felt the need to let go of, put on waivers, and Dallas claimed him. I think he's going to be a decent fit there in Dallas. They'll probably play him more in a defensive role than an offensive role, and that will add to a already pretty big stockpile of European defensemen they have over there. And now, the next thing, as I adjust myself, Mete was claimed by the Senators, like I said, with Montreal making moves for defensemen. They put Victor Mete on waivers, which I just don't understand why. He's a solid young defenseman who still has room to grow. Claimed by the Senators. He'll probably be a good bottom six defenseman there. He's more used for his defensive role than his offensive role. There was a meme going around where he hasn't scored in like 150 games. So happy that he did. He's an old London Knight boy, and I loved watching him play in London. But yeah, he's on a new team now. He joined Cedric Paquette, who is a former Lightning player, and I wish him the best of luck. And now we get into the 2 contract extensions. So I'll start with the less big of a deal. Scott Laughton extended by the Flyers, 5 years, $3 million. Pretty long term for Laughton. Not a lot of money. I think Laughton has some real potential to bloom into a good top 6 forward for the Flyers one day. Probably more of a power forward top 6 center, but top 6 nonetheless. So far in 38 games this year, he has 17 points, and overall playing a pretty good role in Philadelphia. He's not really being dragged down by the unsuccessful year they're having over there. He's kind of flourishing a little bit, and his numbers would probably be a lot better if they were doing better, but they're still solid. They're still half a point per game numbers. And now we got the big contract signing. Alex Alafalo signed a 4-year extension with the Kings. Yeah, a lot of news about Iafallo being traded. I could have seen it happening. I guess LA just didn't really get a offer they wanted, either that or they really wanted to keep him. They were probably doing both, taking offers on him and trying to get a good contract negotiated. And the contract is actually a 4x4, which is super fair for Iafallo. Probably a first-line caliber player for them for the next couple of years. So far in 39 games, he has 25 points, which is pretty good on a more defensively based Kings team this year. And he's one of the young bright spots on that team, and I think that this is going to be a really great deal for the Kings and Iafallo. If Iafallo can continue his success, then that's going to be great for both parties involved. All right. Oh, my water bottle fell. So now we are done with all the news, and now it is time to get on to the final segment here of the podcast. Oh, just need to grab my draft papers up. I'm going to go over, my top 10, and I'm going to go over some guys who I think are underrated in this draft. So let's start with my top 10 because a bit to talk about. Number 1, I got Matthew Beniers. I think this is, either Beniers, Power, or Hughes is your consensus number 1 pick. I got Beniers. I think he has a great two-way game, what that can translate to the NHL. 60-point potential, doesn't take penalties, really just solid role player. He's a great example of what a hockey player should be. And he's not my favorite player in the draft, but I still have a lot of respect for the guy, and I put him number 1. Number 2, now, this is my favorite player in the draft. I got William Eklund out of Sweden. He's just so great. So far, in 40 games, I'm not going to say so far. I'm really stumbling. 40 games played, he had 23 points. Unfortunately, Djurgården could not go far in the playoffs. They played 3 games against Frölunda in kind of a wild card series. In that 3-game series, Eklund had 2 points. And he's been great throughout the year. He really drives the play. He doesn't look out of place against men. And I just really hope Buffalo does not take Eklund. If they do, I'm gonna come out with a huge rant video on how they're gonna ruin him, because they will ruin him. It's just not a good scenario. Number 3, I got Owen Power. Probably the consensus number 1, but I got him number 3. 26 games played, 16 points for Michigan. Beniers played in Michigan as well. And Power, great defensive capabilities. A Victor Hedman comparison coming from basically everyone. I can see Victor Hedman in him, but I think he needs to really work towards becoming Victor Hedman. There's really nobody like Victor Hedman in the NHL, but Power comes as close as it gets. In terms of size, in terms of kind of his defensive abilities. Offensive abilities, we'll see. I think he has the smarts and stuff for it. He just needs to translate his skills to the NHL. Number 4, I got Dylan Guenther, who's off to such a hot start in the WHL. 12 games played, 24 points for Edmonton. This guy hasn't been ranked high enough, in my opinion. Not a lot of people are talking about his super hot start in the WHL. And I have him high until he really falters. If he does, I might actually have him top 3 by draft day. I might even have him number 1 by draft day, because he's putting up numbers like a number 1 overall pick in prior years. In 2017, he's putting up numbers like Patrick. He's putting up numbers like Hischier. I think Guenther is probably better than those guys too. So yeah, number 4. Number 5, I got Jesper Wallstedt, goalie out of Luleå in the SHL. His average rank is 7. I got him 5. In 22 games this year, he had 12 wins, 10 losses, a .908 save percentage, and a .223 goals against average. And this is a guy putting up really, really solid numbers in the men's league in Sweden, not looking out of place at all. I think that Wallstedt is better than Askarov as a goalie prospect. He's better than him at a younger age. And I think that Jesper Wallstedt is going to be a franchise-defining player. Do not be surprised if he goes number 1 on draft day to a team that kind of needs a goalie prospect, because if you're going to take a goalie number 1, especially with a guy like Wallstedt available, this is the year to do it, because I don't see there really being much better options than Wallstedt out there in terms of pure skill and pure potential. Number 6, I got Kent Johnson. 26 games played, 27 points for Michigan. 3 guys out of Michigan in my top 6. And Luke Hughes going there next year is number 7. Spoiler alert. Johnson is a guy with great high offensive capabilities. Not really a huge defensive game, but he's good enough on his own with his offensive abilities to be a top 10 pick in this draft. Number 7, I got Luke Hughes. 56 games played, 49 points for the USNDP. He's ranked really high. His average rank is 3. I got him 7. I see the hype behind Luke Hughes. I just think that his expectations were way over his head. People were expecting way too much of him coming into this year, and he's still putting up good numbers. I just don't think he's putting up top 5 numbers in this draft class. So I got him number 7. I think that's a good rank for him, especially with the guys after him, which I will get into now. Number 8, I got Brant Clark. 26 games played, 15 points for Nov Zamsky in Slovakia. He's another guy who's ranked really high, and I have him a little bit lower. His average rank is 4. I have him 8. But I do think that Brant Clark, he's developed well this year, especially that physicality part. I just think that there's guys that have passed him with their play this season. Not that he's played bad, but there's just guys that I think are better. Now we get into number 9, and this is a guy who also is not getting enough recognition for what he's doing, and that is Chaz Lucius, who is currently over a goal per game in the USNDP. He's lighting it up. The only real concern with Lucius is the injuries, I would say. He was out at the beginning of the year with a pretty big injury, which may be keeping him down on some people's radar, but I don't believe in drafting with risks. I believe you draft a guy for what he brings to the table and what his potential is, and you could say that his skating is also an issue, but I think if you're a grown 18-year-old player, you can definitely fix your skating in the course of an off-season. Shouldn't be an issue with that. But his average rank is 14, and I think it's a lot lower. Usually there's a lot of high rankings, but also a lot of low rankings. I have him 9. I think that's a good spot for him. I'm not going to put him any higher because I still think that, the injuries are still an issue. I just don't think that it's a huge enough issue to really drop his ranking into like the 20s. And moving on, it's just a little bit ridiculous. Moving on to number 10, I got Fabien Lysell out of Luleå in the SHL. And in 26 games, he has 2 goals for 3 points. And people look at Lysell and they look at his average numbers in the SHL and they look at him and they say, well, he has just, some good offensive play. I don't think Lysell is really shouted out enough for how great he is actually a play driver, how crafty he is with the puck, and how great his two-way skills are as well, because Lysell is not just a one-way player. He's great offensively, and he's great defensively. He can really drive a defensive zone transition. He drives an offensive zone transition. He makes great passes. He can shoot the puck. He's active in the defensive zone. There's really no complaints with Lysell, and that's why I have him number 10. I just think there's guys above him, and I think he kind of lacked the numbers for NHL GMs to look at him and say, yeah, we're going to take him top 5. But yeah, guys who just missed out, Simone Edvinsson at 11, another guy who's great. I think he just needs a little bit more work than these guys above him to really become what he can. Aatu Ratti, who I have at 12, he's been playing a lot better in the second half of the season, kind of found his stride a little bit more. I still don't think that he's good enough to make a top 10 appearance, but I can still see a team spending a mid-round pick on him. Oscar Olsson at 13, another great Swedish player who kind of emerged this year, putting up good numbers in the SHL, great offensive capabilities. 14, I got Zachary Leroux from Halifax. Great kind of power forward, probably going to be a top 6 guy. Power forward with a bit of a scoring touch, nothing more. And at 15, I got Simone Robertson from the SHL, crafty playmaker who has good size on him. He can skate, he can, pass the puck. He's a classic playmaker. So those are my top 10 rankings. And to end this podcast, I'm going to go over some guys who I think are really underrated in this draft. Starting at number 2 with William Eklund. Although his draft stock has gotten a lot better, I still think that Eklund is majorly disrespected with what he can do in this draft. You kind of have to explore for yourself. There's just so much to go over, and I'm running out of time here, but he's just such a great dynamic player on the ice, and I think he's not going to be really a superstar of the team, but he's going to be the guy that goes really underrated on the team with some solid 80-point seasons. Another guy who I think is really underrated is Sasha Pastujov, putting up some really great two-way stats in the USNDP. He's a good two-way player, top 6 potential for sure, and he's not putting up Jack Hughes numbers. He's not as explosive as Jack Hughes, but he's kind of he's the leader on that USNDP team for sure, putting up some really just strong offensive numbers. He's kind of like a Matthew Boldy, and he's not getting the same kind of stock as Matthew Boldy at all. So yeah, I have him 10 spots higher than he originally is in his average rank. At 18, he's 28 average ranked, and I think he's great. The next guy who I think is underrated is Theodore Zvechkov. People look at him and they look at his, okay numbers in the MHL. They put him in the 3rd round. Nothing more to it. dynamic defensive player in Zvechkov. You're getting probably the best defensive forward in the draft, better than Roddy, better than Beniers, better than even, those two guys mainly. He's just so good in his own zone, and his offensive numbers aren't bad considering he has no talent around him and a lot of Togliatti. He's just really kind of playing on his own out there. There's a great article by Scouching on Zvechkov that I have, and it really explains a lot of the reasons why he's low, but people don't really consider those things. They just look at numbers and they say, I'll put him here. Another guy, Alexander Kisakov, who led the MHL in scoring this year. He's a guy who played for Dynamo Moskova, just basically Dynamo Moscow. I ranked him 50 spots higher than he originally is. Average rank of 71. I have him 21. And he's just super underrated. Coronado as well, a guy who's leading the USHL in points. He's tearing it up there. People should have him. I have him 22 right now. He'll probably finish top 15 in my final product overall. William Stromgren is a guy who's underrated. He's putting up some great numbers in the U20 and playing well in the Allsvenskan as well. That is it for page 1. Oh, that's another one of page 1. I've had a few of these printed off, just in case you were wondering. Next, I got Sebastian Kosa. I have him ranked 50. His average rank is actually higher than that, but I would probably put him in my first round in my end product. This is a little bit outdated of a mock draft, but just the way he's playing right now, I'd put him a lot higher than 37, which is where his average rank is. I'd probably put him 20, 25, somewhere around there, 27 to 23. Like, probably 25 would be a safe bet for Kosa, but he's playing like just so great. Who else is a guy who I think is underrated? Maxim Matoryagin. They're just any of these three MHL goalies are underrated. Maxim Matoryagin, Kirill Gerasimyuk, and Semyon Vyazavoy. Look any of them up. They're putting up really great numbers. Like, they're putting up similar numbers to Andrei Vasilevsky in his MHL season. I'm really excited for the U18s to start so I can see those guys in action, because I think if they have a good U18, at least one of them, then they definitely have to have early second-round stock for me, at least, because these are goalies who are putting up similar numbers to Vasilevsky. The one guy who I'm really keeping my eye on is Kirill Gerasimyuk. Vyazavoy is second for me, and Matoryagin is third. Gerasimyuk is playing just amazing on a bad team. He's playing for Varyagi, which is a pretty low-tier team. Like, it's low mid-tier, high low-tier, if that's a comparison, but yeah, Gerasimyuk is great. Vyazavoy I like as well. He's playing really well for AK Bar's AHL team. I think, just give me a minute, I got my whiteboard because I'm doing a video on it soon. No, so it's Tolpar UFA who he's playing for, which is Tolpar UFA's MHL affiliate. I'm pretty sure Tolpar has a team in the KHL. But any three of those guys are just really awesome. I'm a huge fan of all three of them. Let me see if I can find my other draft page. Oh, where are you? Here we are. Nice, I got it. I think there's probably another guy who's underrated. Hugo Gabriel, since playing really well as a defenseman, playing for Halmstad in the Etan. Yeah, I think that's all I have right now. I've gone into the hundreds with my rankings, but I don't have that printed off. Also another guy who's not underrated, but I want to talk about is Matvei Michkov. Go check him out. He's great. And Tampa plays Nashville tonight. Pray to God that they win for me, please. Vasilevsky had a shutout last game, 3-0. Big one. I'm hoping for another one. But I think that's where this podcast is going to end. So, pretty long part one. We're at an hour now, 59:28. Been talking for a long time. My saliva feels like foam in my mouth. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening. If you've made it this far, I'm surprised no one ever makes it to the end of my videos. But yeah, I really just hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast. I will do another one if this one gets decent support. I'm not trying to jinx it, but if it does, please, Lord, have it get decent support. And yeah, I'm really happy that you sticked around to listen to this, because I got to take my time with this one a little bit more in a controlled environment. I'm not trying to spew all my thoughts out at once, although I still am, because that's just how I am with ADHD. I want to get everything out at once. So yeah, thank you all so much for listening. Consider giving it a like. Consider subscribing to me. Really just trying to grow this channel and spread the word about, a real opinion about hockey, not those stupid EA Sports NHL 2191 Drew Doughty ratings and stupid shit like that. But yeah, I just kind of want this to be a more laid-back environment podcast where, you can come and get the NHL news while also having a good time and chilling. So yeah, thank you all so much for listening or watching. If you stared at this blank Benchwarmers podcast, draft review and trade deadline review, episode 1 screen for the whole hour. I would be genuinely amazed if you were able to stare at this screen for an hour and watch. But weirder things have happened. So thank you all so much for listening or watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Maybe. We'll see. But for now, bye.